Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where I'm dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And in this special edition of the Father Leo Show, we're going to reflect on Pope Francis's life, and in a particular way, 5 key takeaways that I received from the Holy Father since his election and now in his death. But before we jump into it, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Let me know what are your takeaways from your knowledge and experience of the Holy Father. And as always, we could always use your support on patreon.com/The Father Leo Show, which gives you some access to some great content and some special perks. So let's just jump right into it now with this special edition of 5 takeaways that I have from my experience and witness of the Holy Father. In his 12 years of reigning as a Holy Father, I have learned quite a bit, and some of what I'm going to say to you might actually challenge you, but at the same time might edify you. Who knows? But I'm going to speak from my personal experiences of this particular Holy Father, and there's 5 particular takeaways that I get. Now, everyone is going to be punditing about his life and his background and how he was a divisive figure. For some people, he was more progressive, but at the same time, if you look at his track record, he also pushed some very traditional and conservative values, but it didn't mean that he was limited in any way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give to you my 5 takeaways and hope that this resonates with you as well. But first and foremost, we just thank God for his pontificate. Whether you agree with him or not, every life is a gift. And he served the church faithfully as a priest, as a bishop, as an archbishop, as a cardinal, and of course for the past 12 years as a Holy Father. And so we give gratitude to God for his pontificate, and we always commend his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed to the mercy of God. May he now rest in the sleep of peace. But here are now my 5 takeaways. And by the way, I'm actually on my way to Rome. I'm leading a pilgrimage of about 100 people. And we were supposed to be there for the Jubilee year anyway. But then it turned out to be a Carlo Acuti's little canonization of hundreds and thousands of people. But now that's actually postponed because of the Holy Father's death. So all of the ritual that follows the Holy Father, that takes precedence. And so it just gave me a chance to reflect quite a bit on what I got from his pontificate. So number 1, that he did things differently. He is unique in so many ways, and it inspired me actually to join the community of consecrated life that I am now a part of, called Voluntas Dei. We are a consecrated community of pontifical right, which means that we're approved by the Vatican, and more importantly, we are international. And the reason why the Holy Father really influenced me to make this decision to leave diocesan priesthood and to join this community of consecrated life and to do the work, to be fully devoted to the work that I do of mission and evangelization through food, is because of him. He just did things differently. He was unique in so many ways. He's the first South American, but from the Americas. He's the first Jesuit, and he was the first person, as the pontiff is put out, he's presented to the people of God in that balcony of St. Peter's. He asked for people to pray for him. I mean, like, he did things in different ways. And so his uniqueness really stood out for me. And every Holy Father is unique. They all approach things differently. But, he moved out of the apostolic palace and moved instead into a humbler suite of rooms in the Casa San Marta, which, by the way, didn't make things easier for the people there. In fact, it made it harder because they had to switch all of security and such just to protect the Holy Father. So while he was trying to make it simpler, he actually made it harder. He also didn't wear the red shoes that the Holy Father normally wears. He wore like I don't know, Dr. Scholl's specials. So he just did things differently, but in a way, it's to be expected because he's a Jesuit. And that kind of frees him up to, in a sense, follow the unique charism that God has given to him. So unique, certainly, whether you agree with it or not, it was at least unique. The second takeaway is that he was one of the more human popes that I have experienced. Now, St. John Paul II was the one that really strikes me as so stately. I mean, like the way he carried himself, the images of him kind of makes him look like a superhero, to be honest with you. Even when he was kayaking with his college students and, and camping and skiing and such, he still kind of looked, I don't know, above humanity in a way. There was just such a dignified quality to him. And of course, Pope Benedict, he was just such an erudite man that he seemed so cerebral. And even though everyone thought of Pope Benedict as very conservative, he did the most liberal thing you could do as a pope. He retired. But he was also very human. He was just very formal. When I say human, I'm talking about kind of folksy and gruff. And why do I say that? Because Pope Francis did things that other popes would never do. He scolded a woman publicly. I don't know if you remember this, but a few years back, it might have been during one of the Christmas liturgies, as he was walking by greeting people, a woman grabbed him, obviously out of excitement, wanting to touch him. She grabbed his arm and he yanked his arm back and he kind of scolded her. And I remember that specifically because I'm going to just say, in my humanity, I would have done the same thing. Like, I've had people just kind of grab me, and even though I'm a very public person, I am very private and reserved. I don't necessarily like a lot of PDA, so to speak, public display of affection, hugging and putting your arm. That's just not me. I might be Filipino on the outside, but I feel like I'm German on the inside, okay? And I remember he scolded this woman. And I remember he looked mad. And you saw his humanity. But then he actually publicly apologized to her. In fact, he kind of made this off-the-cuff comment about Catholic families and how many children they should have and be proliferate, be fruitful and multiply. And he made this really kind of crass comment about, like, come on, you're not supposed to be rabbits, as if, especially in the Easter season, we're talking about fertility here. And he knew that that was probably something that came out of his mouth that he probably should have pulled back a little bit. But he apologized. That's the second thing that I noticed, is that he's so human that he was actually willing to apologize. I don't think I've ever heard a pope apologize. And in these cases, he should have. Because again, he scolded this woman and he said some things that might have been ill said. It was ill spoken. But yet he apologized. So that's pretty impressive. The third thing that I noticed is that, if people were to look at his legacy, some people will say it's controversial. Some people say it was very divisive. Some would just simply call his legacy will be mixed, a mixed set of reactions. And this is kind of what I'm taking away from it. He made conservatives angry, but he also made liberals angry. So in a way, it's kind of a good place to be. He kind of ticked off both sides who might be a little bit more unnecessarily extreme. You find virtue in the virtuous mean, and that's St. Thomas Aquinas. And we're not talking about being a middle-of-the-road person, like as if you're sitting on the fence. No, it takes great balance and dignity to not sit on the fence, but to walk the line of orthodoxy. So we know that he made the conservatives mad, especially with kind of his I don't even want to say climate nonsense agenda. And then I know that he really upset a lot of more traditionally minded people with his encyclical on the blessing of the people involved in gay relationships, homosexual relationships. Got that. But the liberals were just as angry. They're just not as vocal about it because they focused on the liberal things like, oh yeah, he was all big into, giving women more vocal power and prominence in the church. But he also said women are never going to become deacons or priests. We can talk about it, but it's just not going to happen. And he did this through his method of, and he said it from the very beginning of his pontificate, synodality. A word that liberals love, a word that conservatives roll their eyes at. But really, it's just about what he said he wanted his pontificate to be. He wanted to be a pontificate that dialogues rather than dogmatizes or dictates. He wanted more conversation rather than controversies. Now, he did open up a can of worms in this synod of synodality. But guess what? Nothing in the tenets of our Catholic faith have changed, and that's what makes liberals mad. He didn't go as they would want. He didn't go far enough and just simply ordain some women deacons because he just wouldn't do it, because he at least had a deposit of faith. So he kind of ticked off both sides of the people, which I guess means that he was in the right place, because perhaps a little bit more left of center, but because he also made liberals mad, it's so interesting that everyone on the left would rather say that he was the people's pope because he did all these progressive things, but they fail to recognize that he basically really rebuked abortion and the mentality of the trans community. He called it basically a sickness and a disease. And he also really said that women will never become deacon or priests. So made them mad, obviously with some of the other stuff that he did, made traditionalists mad. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, which made him in a very unique place in our world's and church's history. The fourth thing that kind of I take away is connected to his humanity. But what I discovered and what I really appreciated was the way he spoke personally. Now, he's the head of a state, so he should have had a lot more prepared comments. But I will say that when people give only prepared comments, it tends to get a little static, dare I even say boring, because you were thinking it too much. It's like just an exercise of academia. In this case, I discovered that what made Holy Father Francis very popular was that he was very personable. He was very kind of interactive. I'm going to give you some examples. When he first walked out onto the square being announced as Pope, he bowed down and he asked for people to pray for him. And then you had just a bunch of, obviously, Americans raising their hands and doing the epiclesis over him. And it's like, Lord Jesus. But I remember that because I had just finished my meeting with my spiritual director. And then we go down to the lounge because we hear that the white smoke came out and we were glued to the TV. And just shortly after, he comes out there and he kind of looked like a bobblehead waving. And then he asked, can you all do me a favor and pray for me? And I remember I kind of fell back in my chair and went, wait, what just happened? It was a very personable thing. And the other very personable thing is that I remember him talking to a young boy who was weeping because he didn't know if his father, who was non-baptized or didn't go to church, was his father in heaven because he passed away. And I remember the Holy Father bringing him up and saying, come on here, and he's speaking Italian. He's kind of just holding him like a grandfather would console. And he spoke truths to this child that made sense even for me as an adult and someone who has some theological degrees. It was kind of very Little Flower-esque. And then the other thing, and we see this all the time, when he was healthy enough to do the Holy Thursday celebrations, he washed the feet of not just the cardinals and priests, but prisoners, migrants, women, non-Catholics. It was a very striking image. It really personalized this pontificate. And the fourth, this is where it gets a little maybe dicey, is that I sometimes wonder where he got his information from, particularly about America. Now, I know that the American church is its own thing. We are an exception to the norm. For us to be able to practice our faith publicly and freely, there are a lot of Catholic countries, a lot of, countries where Catholicism is heavily persecuted. So I sometimes wonder where he got his information, who was his middle management that brokered information about America and especially about American politics, because this is where I think he got a lot of things not clear or perhaps even wrong. His stance on abortion, he would agree with the current administration, but the border situations and the treating of migrants, he did not get that. He was definitely not in conjunction or in agreement. I mean, he even kind of schooled Vice President J.D. Vance in talking about the hierarchy of truths and the hierarchy of responsibilities of who you're supposed to love. And again, that condemnation didn't sound like him, Pope Francis. It sounded like one of his middle management. And so I think a Holy Father, just like a president of an organization or even a country, they're only going to be as effective as their advisors and middle management. And I can honestly say, I don't think he had the best advisors. And trust me, if any of the advisors are listening and they're like, you know what, I don't like that Father Leo because he's basically criticizing me, let's remove his faculties. Please don't. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I'm wondering who were the American advisors to the Holy Father. Well, probably be kind of more progressive-minded bishops that we all know about in the United States. But that's where I think he may have not been as effective, because I think that as a pope, you need to listen to your people. And you need to listen to certainly those who feel marginalized and abandoned or on the fringe of the church. But it's also kind of important that you listen to the base as well. There are many times when my brother priests and we would talk about the Holy Father, they would almost feel like he was, especially for his letter to the priests. There's a traditional letter to priests that the Pope, by tradition, would write to the priests on Holy Thursday. And I can say that some of my brother priests who are incredibly good men, faithful men, they always felt like they were scolded by the Holy Father, as if we were always doing something wrong. We were never good enough. Kind of felt like, I don't know, the older brother in the prodigal son story. Like, nobody cared for me. Like, we're here doing the work. Why don't you at least throw us a bone and recognize and acknowledge us? But instead it felt like it was a scolding, a castigation. That doesn't make me hate the man, because I didn't. I actually very much appreciated him. I don't necessarily, and being very honest with you, I didn't feel that love of a son as I did for St. John Paul II. I mean, I loved that Pope. And I also felt the same way for Pope Benedict. I loved Pope Benedict. Here, in this case, I appreciate him, I respect him, I honor him, but I never felt that closeness to him, simply because I always felt like he was always scolding us. But then I took it to prayer, and Hebrews 12, verses 16, just kind of came to my mind. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as his child. I know that deep down inside, the Holy Father appreciated his priests, and I know that he has to appreciate the priests in the Catholic Church in the United States of America, even if it is growing in more tradition that he seemingly kind of didn't respect, especially with the motu proprio, the declaration of kind of tampering down the traditional Latin Mass, the TLM, the Tridentine Mass. And so I know that a lot of traditionally minded people felt very much abandoned by this particular Holy Father. And that's too bad. Even, for example, going to Rome, there were times when we would be able just to go to the Vatican and say a Mass. Now you can't say a Mass at the Vatican. You can't just say a private Mass anymore. So there were just some things that felt off. And what do I chalk it up to? Perhaps some of the people that advised him, and they may have not been the most representative of the balance that was needed to kind of strike a tone that, yes, while you are allowed to admonish and scold your priests and traditional Catholics, you also have to show that you love them. And so that's kind of why I say I wonder where he got his news from about people like traditional Catholics, American politics. It makes me wonder. But all in all, I can simply say, as we bring this to a close, that he was truly a unique and effective Holy Father for our time in our world's and church's history. And for that reason, I will continue to offer prayers of thanksgiving to God, and also prayers in petition for his soul, that he will rest in peace. And so as we bring this to a close, I hope that this gives you something more substantial and from a personal, real, authentic, hopefully pastoral point of view experience of this particular Holy Father and what he meant to a priest like me. I truly do pray that our church will never experience the unnecessary divisions that weren't caused by him necessarily, but by how we interpreted things that he said or did. And I hope that we never listen to the media when it comes to the Holy Father and things of the Catholic Church, unless, of course, they're offering true, authentic Catholic teaching from people who know the Catholic Church. But one way or the other, you're going to make your own opinion about this Holy Father, and regardless, he has completed his life's journey. And I can't even fathom the beauty of knowing that he died in the Easter octave, just the day after Easter. That counts for something. And knowing that his last words to the people were Buona Pasqua, Happy Easter, a rising into new life because of the merits of Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening. I hope that this gives you something to think about. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. And please consider supporting us on patreon.com/thefatherleo show so that we can continue to dish out faith, culture, and commentary, even in this special episode to honor our Holy Father Francis and his passing. May his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. God bless you, and stay hungry for God.